But for now, I'd like to talk about NOACA's 40 years of planning. I'll take you through the early years, the evolution of the agency's planning programs, changes in the 1990s, and a glimpse into the future, all in about 20 minutes. After 40 years of problem solving, decision-making, technical advancement, and planning for the region's future, we now have an opportunity to recognize the agency's unique contribution to Northeast Ohio. You won't find NOACA or agencies like it in textbooks on government. I know because I teach government courses. But where else in Northeast Ohio will you find county commissioners, mayors, township trustees, city managers, transit operators, and others all working together to help create a more vibrant, livable region? I personally have worked at NOACA for about half of its 40 years, but I've known about and worked with NOACA my entire professional career. I'd like to add my recollection of the agency's history to the official record. And I think that in your packet you have a booklet here prepared by Cheryl Anesti, which is, I would refer to as the official record, quite a document. It all began in 1968 and was turbulent in many respects. In progress, there was a war, a contentious national election, technological innovation, a new generation coming of age, and acrimonious politics, much like today, but without cell phones and without personal computers. In order to meet the new requirements of federal law, local officials from 7 counties came together to create NOACA. NOACA wasn't formed to conduct transportation or environmental planning, our current mainstays, but to review local applications for federal financial assistance. Does anybody remember A95 review? NOACA's first board had 49 members, and our first president was Bob Brown, not the Bob Brown who's sitting over there, who directs the Cleveland Planning Commission, was our board president last year. This Bob Brown was Portage County Commissioner, and he served as the agency's first president. Dr. William P. Irwin of Case Western Reserve served as NOACA's interim executive director during his first year of operation. Dr. Irwin was a professor of mine. One of my projects was on how Northeast Ohio communities supply water and treated wastewater for the residents. And we've certainly made great advances since then, but we're still studying the same issues more than 40 years later. Transportation planning came to NOACA in 1969 with the merger of the Cleveland 7-County Land Use Transportation Study, known as SCOTS. In 1969, SCOTS completed the region's long-range transportation plan, known as a Framework for Action. The plan took a very growth-oriented view of the region's population. The plan projected a regional population for 1990 that turned out to be much higher than it actually was. And sure, it's enough to give anybody in the planning field a healthy sense of humility. The transportation plan envisioned a highway system that would crisscross the region. Inner belts, outer belts, and even an outer belt were planned. Highways and cars were the primary business of the day. Transit wasn't seriously considered until several years later when NOACA commissioned a special transit study and plan. To a degree, NOACA's early days were a reflection of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs, which included, among other things, the War on Poverty, the Model Cities program, the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, and the creation of 2 new federal departments, Transportation and Housing and Urban Development. As president, Richard Nixon created the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And following the infamous fire on the Cuyahoga River, Congress passed the Clean Water Act in 1972. Section 208 of the Clean Water Act required a metropolitan planning approach to solving water quality issues. With a $3.2 million grant, NOACA was immersed in water quality planning. Also in 1972, the board appointed Fred Pizzadaz, at that time a City of Cleveland official, as executive director. A few years later, in 1977, Congress passed significant Clean Air Act amendments. The link between transportation and air quality gave NOACA the responsibility to determine regional conformity with federal clean air standards and launched the agency's air quality planning program. Political issues were part of NOACA's history as well. In the mid-1970s, Summit and Portage County, in concert with the state's then redistricting program, left NOACA. The Akron Metropolitan Area Transportation Study, AMATS, conducted transportation planning, and the Northeast Ohio four-county regional planning and development organization, NEFCO, was formed to help handle water quality planning. And today, I'm pleased to say that we all work together on transportation, water quality, and air quality. In fact, Jason Stegler, who's now the acting executive director of AMATS, is with us. In the early 1970s, I worked for the Cuyahoga County Regional Planning Commission. Among other things, I reviewed the A95 applications for federal funding. I worked closely with NOACA staff. Staff members of the various planning agencies got along well, although there was a hot rivalry when we played softball. I learned that we're all in this business together, and working together makes a whole lot more sense than not. By the mid-70s, I went to work for the city of Cleveland Heights in the Planning and Development Department. Among my duties, I represented the city manager at NOACA meetings. One of the first meetings I attended concerned the dual hub. Those of you who are unfamiliar with the dual hub may know it as the Euclid Corridor Project, or today, as it's known as the Health Line. The time frame of this one project speaks volumes about the patience, determination, and long-term perspective needed to be involved in transportation planning. In 1981, President Ronald Reagan came into office with new economic policies, and NOACA soon faced cutbacks in a number of its federally funded programs. In response, the agency decided to market its skills and enter the consulting business, much to the consternation of the region's engineering and planning firms, many of whom I represented here today. In late 1988, I joined the NOACA staff as Director of Special Projects. Within days, my life and the history of the agency would take a much unexpected turn. I arrived at work after Labor Day weekend to a sight I'll never forget. Yellow crime scene tape was all over the NOACA offices. The state auditor and the county prosecutor had seized the agency's financial records and began an investigation that lasted more than 3 years. The fallout of this investigation called into question the very existence of the agency. Funders expressed doubts about the agency's abilities to meet its obligations. Some communities stopped paying local dues. Board members questioned their responsibilities and wondered whom to trust. Rumors abounded about everything from personal habits of Fred Pizzadaz to possible indictments. The media had a field day. For a while, articles appeared almost daily in the press. Nothing was off limits. For the board, the climate was tense, and for the staff, it was demoralizing. In fact, many left. In this very peculiar atmosphere, I arrived for work on Wednesday, February 8th, 1989, the day of the monthly board meeting. As I walked into the office, covered with snow and slush, Cuyahoga County Planning Director Paul Alcides greeted me. He said the steering committee wanted to see me. I thought, what else could go wrong? Ralph Berry, the Medina County Commissioner and President of the board, told me that Fred Pizzadaz would be taking a leave of absence during the rest of the investigation. He asked if I would serve as acting executive director. I was surprised, honored, and a bit leery. There were so many emotions that even today it's still hard to sort them through. I said I'd do anything to help the agency, but in the back of my mind I thought that Fred would return in a couple of weeks and fire me immediately. My promising career at NOACA would be down the tubes, and at best I would be a footnote in the agency's history. But I did accept the position, and after a very long day I left to go home. I got into my car and found it wouldn't start. All I could do was laugh. On the very day I became responsible for transportation planning in Northeast Ohio, I couldn't get home. But the next morning, I did get home eventually, thanks to AAA. The next morning, we began the long journey from an agency in crisis to a valued community asset and a respected regional resource. Over the next few years, NOACA completed a strategic planning process that transformed the agency from top to bottom. As it turned out, Fred Pizzadaz never did return. He was eventually indicted and convicted on a variety of theft and office charges. 3 board members were also indicted, but their cases were dismissed. The state auditor eventually returned the seized records, and I'm pleased to say we've had clean audits ever since. A year or so into our rebuilding process, I asked a reporter who had been covering NOACA when he was going to write a positive story about the agency. His response, what you guys do is boring. The only time we're interested in infrastructure, and he actually sneered the word infrastructure, is if it falls down and blows up. So I learned the goals of journalism and the goals of government just aren't the same. to its credit, the NOACA Governing Board did much more than just change executive directors.